Well, hello everyone, welcome back. So we're going to start our critique this time of the book The Ethical Slut. If you didn't see the first part of this video in which I explained the main argument of the book, I recommend that you go watch it. It's just right here. Or you can go and see the review by the Black Ponderer, which is basically going to be the object of my debate with him next week. So if you have watched the first video and you are a little bit familiar with philosophy, and more specifically ancient philosophy, you've certainly picked on some similarities between the author's argument and a philosophy that is much in vogue on the internet today. And that philosophy is Stoicism, but you certainly have picked up on Buddhism as well. I mean, the authors even mention that they are borrowing some concepts from Buddhist philosophy. Now, if you want to know about Stoicism in details and about its problems, I recommend that you check these videos and also this article right here. For our purposes here, I'm just going to make the following argument. So basically, the authors of The Ethical Slut clearly regard jealousy in the same way as Stoics and Buddhists look at anger. So if there are some limits to the Stoic and Buddhist approach to anger, well then we can expect to find the same limits with the author's approach to jealousy. Okay? Remember I said in the first video that the only problem that I have with the argument is just their approach to jealousy. I have nothing against their advice when it comes to polygamous and polyamorous relationships. Again, I think they're great, and I do believe that by nature we are more inclined towards polygamy than monogamy. Okay, my only problem is just with the way they argue against jealousy. So in order to do this, we need to lay out how the Stoics look at anger, and you will basically see the similarities between Stoicism and the ethics of the Ethical Slut. There's a good book I would recommend if you want to read about this issue, about the issue of anger, about the history of anger, and it's a book by the historian Barbara Rosenwein. She has written a history of anger in a book called Anger, the Conflicted History of an Emotion, and basically she argues that throughout history human beings have looked at anger in different ways, and she outlined three traditions three traditions when it comes to how we deal with anger. The first one is, well, you reject anger almost completely. The second one is you see anger not necessarily as a vice, but sometimes it can be a virtue. Very few times it can have some virtuous benefits. And the third way, which she calls natural anger, which means that now we kind of look at anger as something that is natural, which has its own benefits, and we even celebrate anger now. Like anger became kind of something that is just it's just part of us as human beings, and there is no reason to dismiss it. Now I'm going to focus on the first tradition because that's where the Stoics and the Buddhists are situated. They both advocate for a rejection of anger, just like the authors of The Ethical Slut reject jealousy. Buddhists and Stoics have some goals in mind about achieving happiness, and they theorize that happiness or enlightenment or awakening is the natural thing towards which all human beings should tend. But some things can get in the way of that journey, and therefore it is important to cast those obstacles away. Anger is one of those things, like jealousy would sabotage your way to happiness when it comes to sex and love. And so, why is anger an obstacle to happiness? Well, because both Buddhists and Stoics were highly suspicious of the external world. They rejected the idea that we should respond to things outside of us, like outside of our control. For Buddhists, there are basically three poisons that would cause your misery: hatred, desire, and delusion. And these have nothing to do with the external world, okay? They are so, they only arise within you, okay? So you are solely responsible for them. But if they are in our control and they're making us miserable, well, why don't we just let go of them? I mean, it's kind of like the beginner's mind, okay? Like we kind of have to let go of those things, but there are some fears that, you know, make us not daring to let go of them, okay? So we just don't dare to let go of those things because we think that they are valuable. We think that the things that, you know, that make us desire, that make us hate, that provide us with, you know, delusions, we think that they are valuable, like our possessions, or, you know, our attachment to the external world. So we are afraid to let them go. We hold on onto these things as if they are justified, as if things outside of us, so external events, cause them. And so that is related to our conception of reality. We have a wrong assumption about what causes our mental states. So if I'm angry, it's because something outside of me, something in the external reality, caused me to be unhappy. My anger is therefore a response to that. Okay, my anger is a cause. It's a consequence of my unhappiness. Something caused me to be unhappy, and my unhappiness caused my anger. Therefore, the thing that caused my unhappiness also causes my anger. But from a Buddhist point of view, you would say no. There is nothing outside of you that causes your unhappiness. It's the anger that causes the unhappiness. And anger is something that rises within you. So you have the power over it. Okay, you have the power to control that anger. You have the power to choose whether to feel it or act out on it or not. It can only arise if you let it. So if you consider that the external world exists and has some attachment over you, then yeah, you're gonna let the anger come out, and you are going to act out on that anger. And so for the Buddhist, it is the poisons themselves that cause your unhappiness. If we let them go, if you live without attachment, without, well, suffering, without desire for things that are material and are fleeting, if we let go of our hate, well, we will find nirvana. You know, we will find enlightenment, we will find peace and happiness, etc. And so as for the Stoics, they took a similar path. They see anger as unfit for rational deliberation, and it is basically incompatible with happiness. For the Stoics, someone can only be happy if they are in their right mind. And so anger pulls you away of your right mind. Okay, it makes you act in a crazy way. It makes you act like you're mad, like you are insane. And so instead of being in control of your passions, the passions are now controlling you, right? So someone who is angry is literally a crazy person. One of the main figures of Stoicism, Seneca, wrote a lot about anger. He even has a treatise composed to it, which is called On Anger, and in which he says in this treatise, some wise men have said that anger is a brief madness. For it is no less lacking in self-control, forgetful of decency, unmindful of personal ties, unrelatingly intent on its goal, shut off from rational deliberation, steered for no substantial reason, unsuited to discerning what is fair and true, just like a collapsing building that's reduced to rumble even as it crushes what it falls upon. And so what is problematic with anger is that since it takes you out of your right mind, which is the tool that you use in order to understand the world around you, to know what is true and what is fair. When you begin seeing things that are not there. Okay, you can no longer distinguish between what is present, what is true, and what is just a fantasy, or what is just a phantom. So Stoics say that when you are angry, you are just mistaken about the world. Seneca thought that the reason we get angry at something is because of a lack of knowledge about the thing that is making us angry. If we have enough knowledge about an event, we'd see that it actually makes sense because it is part of nature. You know, when people understand the laws of nature, it actually makes it easier to bear, for example, a disease. Right? Therefore, you know, understanding why you are jealous, understanding the causes of your jealousy, will make it tolerable. Right? So having knowledge about something makes it easier because having knowledge about something means that you have some power over the things that matter the most. In this case, yourself. You are the thing that matters the most. To quote Seneca, suppose that someone has reckoned he was harmed, wants to take revenge, and then immediately calms down when some reason urges against it. I don't call this anger. I call it the movement of a mind still obedient to reason. Anger is something that leaps clear of reason, that snatches reason up and carries it along. And so he thought that anger was basically a judgment, and so it could be controlled. You know, just like in this case where, you know, something you know, harmed you, and instead of acting out directly to seek for revenge, you just waited patiently. For Seneca, this is reason. Okay, this is not anger. In anger, well, you don't have this moment of clarity, of waiting and thinking. You want to learn more about what happened, because you know you don't want to rush into, for example, accusing people if you don't have, you know, all of the substantial information. You know, and so anger can yield to reason if we are patient with it. You are just angry because you don't have the full story. But if you are patient and think more about the event and understand it better, well, you're certainly going to feel less angry. It's like when someone does something bad to you and you lash out to them, but when you learn that they didn't mean to, or that they acted like that because of some understandable reason, well, you feel less angry. You know, like you can still, you know, feel like you are entitled to some compensation, to some reparation, but the feeling of anger will certainly be reduced. And so Seneca is saying that you probably face more situations like those than you might think. He says we struggle against the passion's first causes. The cause of anger is a belief that one has been wronged, to which one ought not lightly give credence. One shouldn't immediately assent even to what is clear and obvious, for some things that are false look like the truth. One must always take one's time. The passage of time makes the truth plain. So the great cure for anger, as Seneca thought, was just to delay, just to wait, think clearly about a situation, and for that you're going to need time. And so once you understand how the world works, then anger would seem totally irrational and uncalled for, because there is no point in being angry at what exists, you know, at what happens, at what is present. Just like the authors of the Ethical Slut say about jealousy, when you're jealous and act out on it, well, you're no longer in reality but projecting your own fears or your concerns with a past conflict or a past pain that has nothing to do with your present partner. So in jealousy, you're just trying to get some payback over something that happened like years ago. And so for Stoicism, if you don't accept what is present, well, you're yearning for something that is not real, that is not here. and that according to them is incompatible with happiness. Happiness requires freedom. It requires that we are active agents, and therefore we have to draw a line between what is possible to do and what is not possible to do. You know, we have to draw a line between what is in our control. You know, if we deal with things that are in our control, well, we are free. But if you deal with things that are beyond your control, well, then you are in chains. You have, for example, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus. In his famous manual, he divided the world into two things, into things that are internal. Those are the things that you have control over, and external things. Those are the things that you cannot control. You have no control over the things that happen outside of you. And so he said it. It only makes sense for you to focus your attention on the things that you have control over. The wealth, for example, is not something. I mean, losing wealth, for example, for the Stoics, not something to get angry about. Just like, you know, it doesn't make sense to get angry about the weather. All right. Because you cannot do anything about it. You know, when you lose big amounts of your wealth, like the founder of Stoicism, Zeno lost most of his wealth, and you know, he decided that he cannot do anything about it, so the hell with it. To quote Epictetus, he says, "It is impossible that happiness and yearning for what is not present should ever be united." And so the cure is to be indifferent to the world, to take it as it comes, to accept the negatives. But to do that, we have to pay close attention to how we're perceiving the events. Okay, like for the Stoics, what causes my anger is not the event itself, but how I perceive it. I have no control over the weather, and the weather exists objectively, but I can control how I think about the weather, how I perceive it. Am I perceiving it in the way that, you know, the weather exists, or am I just, you know, throwing in some fantasies, some superstitious ideas onto the weather, right? And so what causes my unhappiness are my thoughts, not the external world. And therefore, like the Buddhists, the external world isn't worthy of any attachment. As Marcus Aurelius, another famous Stoic, says in his famous book, The Meditations, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Therefore, guard accordingly and take care that you entertain no notion unsuitable for virtue and reasonable nature. And so what this means is that the qualities of your thoughts depend on how close to truth they are. Saying that the external world doesn't really matter doesn't mean that you cut yourself off from the world, all right? On the contrary, the Stoics thought that you can only reach true indifference to the world by being engaged with it, by examining it, by having a contemplative approach to the world, and making sure that your thoughts are true, that your thoughts correspond to how the world really is. Okay? So for the Stoics, the problem with anger is that it corrupts our reason, like it distorts our judgment, and so it argues that anger makes us see the world differently, as the word than the word is in reality. That it means that we should take the world as it is and not how we want it to be. And so this is why Seneca advises people to always be expecting bad things. Okay, always expect that bad things will happen to you as a way of accepting the state of the natural world. He writes, "The wise man, calm and even tempered in the face of error, not an enemy of wrongdoers, but one who sets them straight. leaves his house daily with this thought in mind. I will encounter many people who are devoted to drink, many who are lustful, many who are ungrateful, many who are greedy, many who are driven by the demons of ambition. You have to expect those things, just like I expect that whenever I record a video, all the dogs in the neighborhood are gonna be barking. And so, many thinkers, way after antiquity, have found extreme valuable wisdom in the Stoics. If you go look at the Renaissance and even many people of the Enlightenment, which occurred during the 16th and 17th century, we call those Neo-Stoics. And the first Neo-Stoic is believed to be a Christian humanist called Justus Lipsius, who in an essay called On Consistency, not sure. He actualized Seneca's notion of constancy of wise men. Seneca thought that the point of philosophy is to achieve a state of calm that you can maintain constantly. That's in his On the Firmness of the Wise Men. Basically, nothing can trouble his mind, and so in the words of Lipsius, you develop a right and immovable strength of the mind. So, nothing can bother you. And so these Neo-Stoics, they held a very bleak view of anger. Some Neo-Stoics, like Johann Weyer, I'm not sure of the pronunciation. He was a physicist of that period, a physician of that period, which means he was a doctor. He called anger a disease that can be cured through humorism. That was the belief that diseases occur through an imbalance between the humors of human beings, because there is an imbalance in the body. So you balance the body, you balance the humors, and so you cure the disease. And so he advised, for example, his patients to do practical exercises, just like Seneca would do, to keep their mind in check. And those exercises resemble a lot what the authors of the Ethical Slut, advocate. Like as we said, they give practical exercises to do in order to have better control on your jealousy, and you're gonna see the similarity. So this is quoting from Rosenwein's book. So he says that both morning and evening you should ask yourself, which bad deed did you correct? What vices did you resist? Did you restrain your anger? The key point was to conquer yourself. Then too, during the course of the day, his hypothetical patient, always a man, wives were to be kept quiet while their husbands were engaged in anger therapy. He was obliged to perform numerous tasks. He had to repeat to himself various handy aphorisms about anger's horrible effects. He had also to meditate on edifying historical examples, scold himself when he saw signs of ire, and bring in a personal trainer, a good friend, to monitor his behavior. So this is kind of similar to modern day coaches, if you want, and yeah, it is very similar to how the ethical slut deals with jealousy, right? So, like our authors, we have the same three parts of the argument. We have the first part. We need to have a clear idea about the world. We cannot have any misconceptions. Second, you are whole. You are your own integrity. You are whole and complete. And three, you are responsible for your own emotions. In my previous video, I said that the argument of the ethical slut has three parts, and well, this is it. And we can also add that Stoics had similar views regarding sexuality, as the first Stoic, for example, the founder of Stoicism, Zeno of Citium. He imagined an ideal city based on love and on polygamy. The book is now lost. We don't have it. We only have fragments of it and testimonials from other sources. But one of the most famous source is by the Stoic doxographer Diogenes Laertius, who writes about Zeno's Republic, quote, they say too that it's the Stoics who follow Zeno. They say too that the wise men will love those young men who by their own outward appearance show a natural aptitude for virtue, and this opinion is advanced by Zeno in his Republic. So we don't really know if by love they mean, like some sort of platonic love, or if there is also some sexual love being involved there. And they also teach that women ought to be in common among the wise. So you have polygamy. No one has their own wives. All wives are shared, and of course the wives also have to share their husbands. So to continue. So that whoever meets with anyone may enjoy her, and this doctrine is maintained by Zeno in his Republic, and by Chrysippus in his treatise on the Republic. And then they say, we shall love all boys equally after the manner of fathers, and all suspicion on the ground of undue familiarity will be removed. So you also have a very similar idea about child rearing, like you would find in the Ethical Slut. So we have polygamy, we have polyamory, possible homosexual relationships, and shared child rearing. All of these are achieved by a rejection of anger, and as you can guess, for Zeno to advocate such a utopia, anger was also another name for jealousy. Right? I mean, you cannot possibly think that we can have this kind of polyamorous republic if we don't address the problem of jealousy. If we don't equate jealousy with anger somehow. And like modern polygamous tribes today in Ethical Sluts, Stoics were often demonized by their opponents for being degenerates, rapists, immorals, incestuals. To quote one of their enemies, Philodemus, he says that it pleases these holy people to assume the lives of dogs, to speak shamelessly and without restraint to everyone without distinction, to masturbate in public, to abuse young men whether they love them or not, and whether or not the young men willingly surrender themselves or have to be forced. Boys are held in common by all. They have sexual relations with their own sisters and mothers and other close relatives, and with their brothers and sons. To achieve sexual gratification, there is nothing that they will abstain from, not even the use of violence. The women make advances to men and seek to persuade them in every way to have intercourse with them, and if they fail in their efforts, offer themselves in the marketplace to anyone, whatever. Everyone misbehaves with everyone else. Husbands have intercourse with their maid servants. Wives abandon their husbands to go off with those who better please them. So I think that like many Stoics were seen by many others. Like ethical sluts are seen as immoral, as shameful and promiscuous, having sex with everybody, sometimes even with members of their own family. Like you have this demonizing caricature that both the ethical slut and the Stoics seem to share. And it's quite funny because Philodemus is an Epicurean, so he's a hedonist, and so it's funny because Epicureans, they suffered from the same stereotypes from other people. So it has a touch of irony there, but I think it is clear that ethical sluts are basically Stoic philosophers. Okay, they have the same philosophy, the same beliefs, the same practices, or the same method toward belief, and they even had the same criticism. Okay, some is valid, some is not at all valid. Especially the criticism on the moral ground. That always gets out of hand very quickly. But to remind you about Rosenwein, the Stoic and Buddhist model wasn't the only one to look at anger. There were other models and other schools who did not see anger as all bad or simply as a vice. Some have responded that it can also be a virtue when it is appropriate. And so this tradition stems from Aristotle, who didn't think that anger is all bad. What he didn't like was when you get angry about the wrong thing, at the wrong people, at the wrong time, and in the wrong place. And the way to determine those is, of course, by reason. You use reason to know when it is appropriate to be angry. So, as he says, just because we accept that anger can be a virtue sometimes, it doesn't mean that you have to lose yourself and to lose all composure, but you have to use your reason to guide your anger and to contain it as much as you can, as much as it is appropriate. He says, anger is necessary, nor can any struggle be carried to victory without it. It must fill the mind and kindle the spirit, but it must be employed as a foot soldier, not the general. Okay, so he sees that anger is necessary if you want to win victories, if you want to achieve some goals. Well, sometimes anger is helpful. And so this line comes from Seneca. It's also from his treatise on anger. And so, as you can guess, he refutes it immediately, saying that Aristotle is wrong, because if reason is in control, then it's not anger. You're not feeling anger. If you still have composure of yourself, we cannot call that anger. But the point is that there is a tradition that tells you that anger isn't bad, and it can actually be useful to win struggles. Okay, that's the point. So, does that mean that jealousy can also work like that? Well, this tradition served also Christianity to develop an interesting look on the significance of anger. Okay, and of course, as you know, anger or wrath is one of the deadly sins in Christianity, and so we think that when a Christian gets angry, he is committing a sin, and therefore anger is bad. But many theologians, adopting the Aristotelian worldview of emotions, well, they kind of challenge this. The problem with wrath, they say, is when you lose your sense of self. Okay, when you let it run wild. In an unjustified manner. Okay, it's when you are in a state of frenzy, and when you go a little bit too far with your anger, when you don't know when to stop it. For example, Thomas Aquinas argued that when anger is guided by reason, well, we talk about righteous anger there, but it is anger that is not rational that is condemned. Okay, when your anger is not rational, that's when we condemn it. And so conveniently for Aquinas, it is necessary to feel angry when faced with something to be rightfully angry about, like, for example, evil or injustice. As he says, it is natural to everything to rise up against things contrary and hurtful. And even more so, if someone does not get angry at what is contrary and hurtful, meaning injustice or evil, then that person is evil too. There's a famous quote that you will find on the internet that says, "He who is not angry when there is a just cause for anger is immoral." Why? Because anger looks at the good of justice. And if you can live amid injustice without anger, you are immoral as well as unjust. Now, this quote is often attributed to Aquinas, but it's not his. He never said that, but it's more of an abridged version of his thoughts about anger. It is basically summing up. It is basically a summary of his two questions on anger in the Summa Theologia. It's question 49 and question 150, 158. They are both available online if you want to give it a read. But the idea is that, you know, the quote is not from Thomas, it's attributed to Thomas Aquinas, but it encapsulates his thoughts perfectly. So the main idea is basically, you know, don't be angry at the sinner, be angry at the sin, you know, kind of thing. And so this brings a new dimension to the problem of anger. Anger is justified when it is about something that is appropriate to be angry about, meaning an injustice, for example. If there is an injustice, being angry is not just good, it is moral. And sure, you can think of many instances where being angry at sin led to wars and to oppression, but it is also necessary to note that all of social justice movements, well, they kind of follow this logic. What allowed the emancipation of slaves, for example, of women, of sexual minorities, were not really Stoic ethics, but more like, you know, anger and rage at a deeply unjust system. And recently, you know, our views about anger, you know, they kind of began to change. With Romanticism, for example, which starts with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, it brought another way to look at anger, which is, you know, its political utility. Like the Romantics, they rejected the Stoic idea of anger as, you know, as useless and has no place in politics, since politics is all about, you know, deliberation. I mean, it's supposed to be. Emotions should play a little role in there, especially the destructive ones. And so the Romantics kind of championed a more critical vision, which, by the way, I mean, there's a great book about this. It's called The Age of Anger by historian Pankaj Mishra. I'm not sure of the pronunciation. And, you know, I mean, basically, with Rousseau, and I'm quoting from the book here, what is crucial about Rousseau and many of his ideological successors is that politics was always personal for him. And so the idea of being detached from the world, having no attachments, like in Buddhism or Stoicism, was a bit foreign for the Romantics. The political is now personal, and so a new idea came in. The idea that throughout history it wasn't that anger was bad or prohibited. The problem was who is allowed to be angry. Minorities, for example, were always told not to give in to anger, that they have to be polite and civil. Black people can be angry at the police, for example. Women cannot be angry at the patriarchy. LGBTQ people cannot be angry about heteronormativity. And of course, poor people cannot be angry at rich people. But as the public sphere was broadening, more people who were excluded from politics, the marginalized, they too now can have, can have their say. They too can comment on what they see. They too can have an opinion about what is right and what is wrong. And so a certain relativism settled, and now we can ask the question, who gets to decide what is right to be angry about? People in power, people who oppress others tend to discredit the anger of the oppressed, or direct it towards scapegoats. They either tell you that being angry is bad, or that you're angry at the wrong people. It's not the rich you should be angry at. It's the immigrants. Or if you want to throw in some old psychology a la Peterson, you can just say that you are actually angry at yourself. You're not angry at the rich. You are angry at yourself. You should work on that. And so, to quote one of the obvious problems that you can find in Stoicism. This is from the article I showed you earlier by Spencer McDaniel. Is Stoicism a useful philosophy for the modern world? She says, the traditional attitude of ancient Stoicism towards poverty is that people should learn to be happy with what they already have. regardless of whether they are rich or poor. While learning to be happy with what one already has is certainly admirable, Stoicism tends to ignore the fact that there does exist a minimum threshold of things that people need in order to survive in the modern world. Meanwhile, while around 2/5 of Americans struggle to pay for their basic needs, the ultra-wealthy are hoarding a large plurality of the wealth. Again, people learning to be happy with what they have is probably a good thing for them, but the general attitude of Stoicism is one that ultimately supports the status quo. In effect, Stoicism allows the wealthy to blame the poor for not being happy with what they have, while simultaneously allowing the wealthy to continue sitting on their mountains of wealth unperturbed. Unperturbed. That's how you. I gotta check how you pronounce words before I record a video. So what we came to realize is that those holding positions of power get to be the ones who decide, who is allowed to be angry and about what. Okay, like the YouTuber from the channel Then and Now says in a very good video that you should check, one clear and consistent finding across the anger research literature is that not everyone gets the same right to be angry. While some people may be rewarded and praised for their anger, others are told to be civil, to calm down, and to lose, and even lose credibility. So yeah, so I really recommend his video that dwells more about the history of anger. It's very great. Go watch it. But what is important for us, go watch it after this. Don't go now. But what is important for us here is that we now see anger not just as an irrational emotion that we have to just control or to avoid or to contain. We have to do that, of course, but because of course, anger leads to violence, and since we're talking about relationships, we know that jealousy, like being angry and being jealous, can lead to a lot of physical violence, can lead to emotional and mental abuse, can lead to threats. But the point is, we don't dismiss anger anymore as an emotion that leads us astray from reality. But now we see it as an emotion that actually can reveal things about reality, as much as any other emotion or any other cognitive ability. Anger is now considered just a reaction to an injustice. And therefore, if we see anger as a reaction to an injustice or as an indication that something is wrong in the world, just like when you get angry when you see discrimination, for example. Well, if we go with this view, the Stoic view kind of falls apart. Because remember, the Stoic and Buddhists, they claim that there is nothing revealing about the world in anger. Okay, anger doesn't reveal anything. Anger simply distorts, it blinds us, but it doesn't reveal anything. Okay, it has no truth. There's no truth value in things you do or things that you say when you are angry, when you are acting out on anger. And so, if anything, it reveals anything more about us than facts about the external world. Your anger reveals more about you than about your relationship or about the world. That's the Stoic view. Okay, so following the Stoic Buddhist approach, whenever someone is angry, you have to divert the conversation from the primary subject, which is an injustice, which is something bad that happened, and we kind of want to address it. So you move the subject from that injustice to which the individual is reacting to the internal state of the individual. Okay, and so we arrive at the main problem with the ethics of the ethical slut. It has the same problems as Stoicism. First, it dismisses jealousy as just an emotion that reveals more about the person who is feeling jealous, who is feeling jealousy, than about the objective situation between the partners, and therefore it immediately assumes that the focus should be on the emotion expressed or on the mental state of the jealous person rather than the situation between the two. And so the problem is not that I'm betrayed. The authors have already established that there is no betrayal, so it isn't an injustice that I'm undergoing. So no, the problem is that I have unresolved issues. Okay, and so the authors are taking therefore for granted that jealousy is always bad, and that there can be no justification for jealousy, just like there are reasons for it. You need to express your emotions. They'd be like, okay, you can express your emotions. You can have reasons to be jealous. We will listen. We will help you get through it. But that's it. Don't expect more from us. Okay, from an ethical slut. Okay, the ethical slut just listens to you while you go through your jealousy, but they're not going to fix anything, because again, there is no problem. Okay, you are not betrayed. It's just in your mind. Okay, and so the goal becomes to help you cope with your jealousy and accept a situation that, from your point of view, is actually unjust. All right. So we can ask, is it wrong to feel jealousy? Is it always wrong, no matter what kind of situation we're talking about? Isn't it justified, for example, for a poor man to be jealous of a rich man? Isn't it justified for a jailed man to be jealous of a free man? Isn't also justified for a transgender person to be jealous of someone who is heterosexual because of all of the privileges that they get, because they have life easier. They're not threatened. They're not seeing their rights running the risks of being overturned all the time. So jealousy can be justified in those cases. Those are clearly instances of injustice. Or is it that it is only in love and in relationships that jealousy is no longer valid? If a poor man is jealous of the rich, we won't say that that's because of the myths our culture has put in the poor man's brain. We wouldn't say that's because he has no control over his emotions. Why then, when it comes to wealth inequalities, you don't hear the phrase, no one makes you jealous but you? But when it comes to relationships, suddenly you are responsible for your jealousy. When you get jealous of your siblings, for example, do you never have good reasons for it? Parents, despite the unconditional love and the abundance of love, despite that, they cannot create injustices between the siblings, between the brothers and sisters, even if it wasn't their intention. Can they just screw up, even unintentionally, and cause an injustice that would lead some kid to be jealous of his brothers and sisters? And the fact that we always tell people not to feel jealous because it's bad, can that also lead to how prone to anger we can become later? The fact that ever since you were a kid, people were causing injustices on you, and you never get satisfaction, and you are told that you cannot be angry or jealous. Won't that also play a role in the fact that when you get angry, it always goes, through the roof? You get an uncontrollable rage because ever since you were a kid, you were constantly being told that you cannot be angry or you shouldn't feel jealous. or sometimes they would tell you, it's okay to be angry, and they would sit you down and be like, well, tell us more, but tell us more about how you feel and all of that. But that talk isn't going to do anything about what caused you to be angry in the first place, if the anger, again, was appropriate. Don't you think that is also a fuel for later bursts of uncontrollable anger? And so doesn't this come off as an attempt to just pacifying a situation, to just pacify the situation? Like you are just trying to avoid the external conflict by making the conflict inside the jealous person, the authors of the Ethical Slut seem to think that way, at least. Since they advocate for what we call restorative justice, they take inspiration, from strategies to resolve conflict that are used in some schools, for example, that use this concept of restorative justice. They say there are a number of conflict resolution strategies that we find helpful to draw on. A marvelous body of wisdom is emerging from efforts to teach emotional intelligence and restorative justice in some American high schools and middle schools. Students in these programs are being trained to be peer counselors and peacekeepers to intervene in conflicts that might become violent or otherwise destructive. And so basically, restorative justice is a strategy of solving conflict that aims at reconciling the two parties rather than, using retribution or punishment. Like, it makes both parties engage in mutual effort to reach agreements to solve their issues, and therefore restore the harmony between the two parties and within the group. And so, according to the philosophers Linda Resdick and Colin Murphy, in their entry in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the entry is called Reconciliation. They say, that restorative justice can either be an outcome or a process, and they write, reconciliation as an outcome is an improvement in the relations among parties formerly at odds with one another. While the outcome of reconciliation is oriented towards a future marked by peaceful and just relations, the processes of reconciliation are typically oriented towards the continuing bad feelings, suspicions, or harms that were created by the conflicts and injustices of the past. So basically, reconciliation means that you move on. Either with a better relationship between the two parties, or moving on with a better relation to yourself or with yourself. All right, like you come to terms with your past and stuff like that. It is surely efficient to solve issues without violence, and I would recommend this in many cases, in many, perhaps in the majority of cases when it comes to conflict, but it has a downside. Right. And important objections raised, against restorative justice is that in many instances, reconciliation and restorative justice simply is a way for the offenders to get away with their crime. To continue the article, they write, for example, when the government of white settlers states call on indigenous people to reconcile, the politics of reconciliation may simply look like a demand that the indigenous people reconcile themselves to the status quo. So in other words, when reconciliation occurs between two parties who have a deeply unbalanced, power relationship, the victim is probably going to receive the shorter end of the stick, during negotiation. Like, if you think, for example, a lot of feminists certainly feel this way when they are told to adopt a reconciliation approach with their offenders, for example. Like, we just have to reconcile ourselves with the status quo of prostitution or of patriarchal exploitation. So it can feel this way. It can come off as, you know, a way for the offender to get away. And so restorative justice tries to respond in some ways to these criticisms. It advocates, for example, reparation, like restoring a stolen land for a group of people, or give reparation for past harms, like between, you know, whites and blacks in the United States. However, this has raised some problems, such as, you know, who can say what is the cost of slavery, for example, in terms of reparation. And also, as Murphy and Radzik say, that some critics think that it can send the message that everything can be reconciled if you have the right price. You know, if you can pay the right price, well, everything can be forgiven, everything can be reconciled over. And so as a result, perpetrators can just have to only pay a certain price, but they don't have to do anything more than that, you know, to get reconciliation. So it doesn't stop them from perpetuating harm as long as, you know, they can pay for it. And so reparation can also be a way to forget about history, so long as, you know, we have the right price for it. Or you can, you know, you can keep on making immoral actions as long as you can pay reparation. And so, in other words, it seems like restorative justice can buy you a clean conscience without having to fix anything, actually, you know. And so this leads to the principal objection to restorative justice, that it sacrifices justice for the sake of peace, you know, which can make a lot of people think of other forms of justice who are more inclined toward punishment and retribution, more appealing. And I think that's a problem, because I totally reject retributive justice. So to quote from the article, from the entry, one view is that reconciliation and retributive justice are in tension with one another. The conflict between justice and reconciliation is visible when individuals or communities choose non-punitive responses in hopes of securing peace. According to one view, insofar as transitional societies do not punish wrongdoers, they promote reconciliation at a significant moral cost. They sacrifice justice. And so indeed, it's very convenient to see jealousy. Let's go back to jealousy, because I think that we moved a little bit away from it. So it's convenient to see jealousy as a reaction. It's really convenient to see jealousy as, you know, a projection rather than a reaction to an injustice when you advocate for restorative justice, right? Because you kind of committed yourself to a worldview that only works if jealousy can only be seen as an emotion that cannot tell us anything about injustice. And therefore you have to resort to strategies about, you know, peacekeeping, about pacifying the situation, to calm down the jealous person, just like a therapist will only try to pacify your anger without necessarily fixing what made you angry in the first place, right? And so since the goal is now to maintain peace, well, then all you have to do is say that jealousy is just causing trouble, you know, it's troubling our peace. And since it is an irrational emotion, we can just throw it out or talk about our feelings just to cope with them and to contain them. And so from this angle, well, dialogue with an ethical slut can be biased because at no point the ethical slut is willing to gamble her freedom, right? Because their view entails that jealousy is always invalid no matter what. And so when you are negotiating or discussing with your partner, well, you know, you are already on the side, if you are the jealous one, you are already on the side of the wrong here, you know. So when you are discussing the ethical slut knows that their freedom is safe and that they never have to compromise it. Okay, so they automatically get to be in a better position than their jealous partner, and so if you need to compromise your freedom for the sake of others, it means that your freedom is somehow causing an injustice, right? But you already ruled out that possibility, okay? So the only available choice to the jealous partner is either to accept the terms of the slut or to leave the relationship, okay? And so that can be that can be easily seen that, you know, these philosophies, these approaches to jealousy are at the end just a way of emotional manipulation to benefit just one party. Okay, I'm not saying that this is the intent. I'm saying that it can come off this way. It can be seen as emotional manipulation. And so this is, of course, ironic and at odds with many parts of the ethics advocated, because it seems that the ethical slut is not willing to do the beginner's mind thing when it comes to the ambivalent status of their own action. You know, like, are you like I mean, it's fair to ask the question: are you willing to take the risk that maybe at the end of our conversation, you, as an ethical slut, you realize that having sex with multiple partners can be wrong? I mean, it can be bad, and therefore you should accept to compromise your freedom or not. Okay, I mean, the ethical slut should also accept this challenge if they want to hold on to the beginner's mind idea, right? But as Dossie stated clearly, she's not willing to compromise her own freedom. And, you know, I mean, yeah, of course, I mean, she's right if and only if she believes that when someone is in pain out of jealousy, there is no villain. Okay? Like, she would be right not to gamble her freedom only if she believes that in case of jealousy there can be no villain. There can be no one responsible for it other than the jealous person themselves. And so, according to this worldview, you cannot have jealousy and villainy in the same room unless they are the same person. All right, you cannot have jealousy and villainy together in a room unless they are both in the same person. And so the option, I'm jealous and there is a villain here with me in the room, so someone who is responsible for that jealousy, is ruled out, right? But you can surely think of many instances, even by the own standards of the ethical slut, where you can get a jealous person and a villain in the same room, right? I mean, what happens when someone breaks an agreement, for example? Isn't that a cause for jealousy? Doesn't that create an injustice and can also create a villain? I mean, the authors spent a big portion of the book arguing about the importance of making agreements. They even have a whole chapter about it, about the importance of making agreements between each other. And even though they stress the importance of keeping your agreements loose to avoid, unrealistic situations, they don't seem to offer alternatives to what happens if we break if the agreement is broken. I mean, okay, if your agreement is too strict and too difficult to maintain, that can come off as an attempt to control the behavior of the other person, and just arranging the agreement in a way that that they'll obviously break it, so you get to deliver the guilt-tripping and self-righteous speech. So of course, when you make agreement, you shouldn't make retroactive agreements, as they call them, but again, they never they never talk concretely about what happens in case of breaking agreements, even a loose one. They'll just say that it is unacceptable, it's just unacceptable to break an agreement, or you'll have to make another agreement to make sure that the breaking of agreements doesn't happen again. To quote, a problem comes up, and instead of arguing over whose fault it was, the people involved simply make an agreement to try to prevent that problem from coming up again, or to deal with it when it does. Okay, but what if the problem that came up was someone broke an agreement? So let's make agreements about not breaking agreements. Okay, or they simply say that an ethical slut should not break agreements. If you break an agreement, then you're not an ethical slut. That's it. And and even if it happens, you still don't have any reason to be jealous, because, as they say, you cannot deal constructively with jealous by making other people wrong. So even if someone breaks their agreement and it makes you jealous, you cannot act it out. And because you have to agree that the ethical slut cannot be wrong. Okay, otherwise, you're not going to deal constructively with your jealousy, So you cannot say that they are wrong, and you cannot say that what they did is wrong. Okay, you have to agree that what happened, whatever it is that can trigger your jealousy, is never wrong. Problem is, why should we commit? Why should we commit to such a difficult worldview, to such a radical worldview? What makes it that when it is the jealous person who has to go through painful things, what makes it okay that they're the ones who have to tough it up, for example? Why the ethical slut cannot tough it up when they're told that they're wrong, for example? When they are told that, well, you did something wrong and you need to fix it. Why can the ethical slut, tough it up and accept that she or he did something wrong? I'm not saying that you can go ahead and make people feel guilty whenever you're jealous. I'm saying that there has to be cases where your jealousy is justified. There has to be cases where, there is a villain and there is an injustice and someone is wrong. And the fact that this option is not available kind of makes it suspicious. Like, take this example. If my partner knows that there is something that I want, okay? Let's say, in my case, the 6 volumes of this very old edition of Élisée Reclus, L'Homme et la Terre. My partner knows that I'm looking for them, and she decides to offer them to someone else. Like, she finds them and buys them for someone else. Well, isn't this what we can all agree is a dick move? Am I not right to be angry or jealous in this situation? Even if I am in a polygamous relationship, if she knows that I really wanted the books and she buys it for another one of her partners, well, I think I'm justified in being jealous here. Clearly the authors don't think so, because they give an example very similar to this one, except that instead of books, they talk about a movie. They say that, imagine, there's a movie you wanted to see and your partner takes someone else to watch it. Apparently for the authors, that's not a dick move, and you have no right to act out on your jealousy there. Okay, to quote, sometimes acting out takes the form of making ultimatums about what your partners may or may not do, or worse, trying to enforce retroactive agreements by getting all righteously indignant about how anybody could have figured out that it wasn't okay to take Bob to the movie you wanted to see, and aren't they inconsiderate and rotten? So, sure, we can agree that throwing ultimatums and enforcing retroactive agreements is a it's kind of self-serving, especially if you do it in a self-righteous tone. It isn't the best way to address issues, but is pointing out that it is a dick move to take the other guy to the movie, and that everyone can agree that it is a dick move to take the other guy when you know that your partner wanted to see the movie. Like, is pointing that out wrong? Like, is pointing it out is pointing it out the equivalent of reinforcing retroactive agreement? Am I not supposed to say, hey, you kind of did something wrong here, otherwise I'll be throwing ultimatums at you? It seems a little bit extreme, doesn't it? Like doesn't it seem like the authors are trying are taking a way too broad definition of jealousy and projection? I mean, they are broadening it to such a degree that anything that can make the ethical slut feel guilty is ruled out as projection of the jealous partner. I mean, we can't even tell you that it ain't right to take Bob to the movie that I wanted to see. It seems that the authors of the Ethical Slut see jealousy in a very similar way that Seneca sees anger. Seneca, even in the original Latin text, the word that he uses for anger is ira, which, as Rosenwein says, when Seneca talks about anger, he did not, and perhaps could not, imagine mild forms. His ira was a very strong feeling. And so, just like Seneca didn't imagine that they are, mild or acceptable forms of anger, Dossie and Janet don't seem to imagine that there are mild and acceptable forms of jealousy. And likewise, also with the Buddhists, now the term that they use for anger, koda in Pali and kroda in Sanskrit, it belongs to one set of mental afflictions, the one compassed by the larger mental category, hatred. So yeah, if by anger you mean hatred, it is difficult to find anything reasonable in anger. So if jealousy is seen like these philosophers look at anger, jealousy becomes as bad as hatred, and so nothing good can come out of it if you act out on it, like hate. Then yeah, I mean, if you go with this idea, with this definition of jealousy, jealousy is really bad, and I guess the ethical slut is right in refusing to compromise their freedom. Problem is, jealousy doesn't have to be like this, it doesn't have to go to the extremes of controlling someone's behavior, and it doesn't have to be dismissed systematically as if nothing good can come out of it. And this unwillingness to gamble your polygamy on the grounds, of justice, of maybe you are doing something wrong, makes it ironic that when the authors tell you that institutionalized monogamy leads to viewing sex as getting away with something, right? Because it seems that it is the ethical slut who is trying to get away with something here. Again, I'm not saying this is intentional. I'm just saying that these are kind of the implications of the argument. Okay, like this is where the argument can lead us. So now we have a problem on our hands. because the ethical slut constructed a system that completely invalidates jealousy, and so there is nothing preventing jealous people to suspect that there is something fishy going on here, right? It sounds like the ethical slut claims to know better what is going on in your mind. Like someone who makes the rule for a conversation in such a way that whatever it is that you will say is only a further proof that the person is right. Kinda is, it's suspicious. It's suspicious. Like whatever it is that you'll say, if it is out of jealousy, then it is game over. You know, like ethical sluts know everything about jealousy, and they cannot be wrong about the content of a jealous person's mind. If you are jealous, then you look at sex and love as a commodity, as an object, as, you know, one of your own possessions. And so you may say, no, just because I'm jealous and mad at you doesn't mean that I see you as an object that doesn't have agency or free will, you know. Like I can be just jealous because, well, you did something wrong, you did something bad. And, you know, I agree that in a lot of cases, you know, your partner, in a lot of cases of jealousy, you know, your partner didn't do anything wrong. Like, you know, when a guy tells his girlfriend to dress a certain way or to decide who she can have as friends, I mean, I think that's way out of line. But surely there are cases where, you know, partners did something wrong and in which our anger and jealousy is justified. You know, I mean, of course, if you are, I don't know, if you are paranoid and whenever your boyfriend talks with a girl, you know, you freak out. I mean, yeah, that's way out of line. You should read the book. But I think there are gray areas, you know. Like, I mean, between the ethical slut and the possessive freak and the overly possessive person, and we can even agree that any degree of possessiveness is already overly. But I mean, between these two, there has to be a lot of gray areas and a lot of degrees, you know. Like surely there has to be cases where polygamy can cause a justified jealousy. And so my only problem is that in the ethical slut's model of ethics, those cases don't seem to exist. Like if you point out that they that your partner did something wrong, they can just say that you are jealous, you know, and put on their righteous face of, now let's talk about your feelings, I'm here to help you, come here, let me help you cope, you know. And if you gotta see through it, and of course you are going to resist, then it would be even more proof that you are denying your own jealousy, and then the ethical slut can just say, well, if you don't admit that you are jealous or you don't own up to your jealousy, I cannot help you. Now admit that. Now admit that you are jealous and admit that I am a commodity to you so that I can tell you that I understand and I'm here for you, but you have to accept that I have my freedom and I'm gonna go fuck Mary. Now, of course, this is a caricature, but you gotta admit that their idea about, you know, starvation economics, which causes jealousy, which makes, you know, love seen as a commodity is, I mean, it's pretty convenient, isn't it? You know, like, of course, no one dares to admit that they are commodifying someone. Everyone knows that it means that you see sex as a commodity, that you see love as a commodity, and so it means that you see other people and their bodies as objects, as something that have market value, that they don't have value on their own, and that this is dehumanizing. And so you're not going to catch a lot of people admitting that. You know, you're not going to catch a lot of people admitting that they are commodifying their partners. You know, the few people who do, I mean, those are psychopaths. We can all agree on that. But but those people cannot account for the majority of people who view monogamy and romantic love as the only real or moral relationship. Like, of course, like, yeah, I mean, I agree that's wrong. I mean, if you see monogamy and romantic love as the only real form of relationship, I'm sorry, but that's dumb. But that doesn't mean that you see others as a commodity. I mean, even if you maintain that monogamy and romantic love is the only moral option for people, it still doesn't imply that you are commodifying your partner. If you want to make your point that these people are wrong about their conception of relationship, which again I agree with, they're wrong, you know, and all of that, you are going to need another explanation than, you know, they see sex as a commodity. You know, if you want to say that, yeah, it's holding on to just monogamy as the only, you know, real relationship, okay, it's wrong, but you cannot explain it by the commodification argument. Like, if you commit to such a worldview, then you have to explain how do you know that people, like for example conservatives, how do you know that these people do see love and sex as a commodity? Like, you are tapping into the knowledge of the content of someone's mind here, right? So how do you know that? I mean, is it the language? Is it because we use words like cheap, for example, or because we use possessive pronouns? So that must mean that we think about love in terms of markets or in market logic. I mean, surely I can use the language of one paradigm to talk about something that belongs to another paradigm while being conscious that these are two distinct paradigms. I mean, we do it constantly through metaphors or analogies. Like when people use the word cheap, do they mean that you have a market value and you have no agency of your own? Or they mean that, well, you do have a value on your own and you have agency, but you choose to give it up. You choose to give up on your agency and your freedom by becoming the object of man's desire. You know? I mean, of course, again, I don't agree with this, but I mean, the people who hold on to conservative views don't necessarily, and even use the words like cheap, don't necessarily see you as a commodity, but more like you chose to be one. You know, you are devaluing yourself by being cheap. Okay? So if the discourse of the jealous person commodifies or objectifies the slut, well, can the jealous person say, I'm not commodifying you, but you are commodifying yourself? How can you prove, I mean, that it is the jealousy that is objectifying you? You know, I mean, I don't think that you'll use possessive pronouns as proof, since ethical sluts use them too. Clearly they know that just because I use a certain language, it doesn't reveal anything about the content of my mind. So how can they say that jealous people see sluts as commodities? You know? I mean, we can ask people, I mean, right here in the comments, you can tell us, I mean, if you experienced jealousy, please tell us that whether or not you consider your partner as an object who has no agency. Or when you were, you know, jealous, was it like you wanted your partner to take responsibility and accountability for doing something wrong? Or maybe you were just scared that they leave, but would that entail that you see them as a commodity? Can't you just be scared of losing someone without consider them a commodity? I mean, does having insecurities and fear about loneliness entails objectification? I mean, I think that the two views can coexist, sure, but I don't think that they are necessarily correlated. You know, I mean, if you have abandonment issues, doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, your partner is an object or is a commodity, or that you see love and sex as a commodity. And the fact that your jealousy can be more more about the failed responsibility and accountability of your partner, means that jealousy doesn't rely on possessiveness or projection, right? Like you can have other causes of jealousy besides being possessive and projecting, and not all of those causes are to be dismissed. Like certainly some of them can be valid, you know, some of them can certainly be rightfully justified. And so in this way, blaming the jealous person for commodifying their partners come off as a way for the partner to avoid responsibility and turning the focus of the conversation on the jealous person, you know, like the focus of the conversation on the jealousy of the other person. And so the conversation shifts from you're doing something wrong or you did something wrong to you are controlling my behavior, you know, to which of course the jealous person can respond with, I'm not trying to control your behavior, I'm just telling you that you are doing something wrong and I am hurting. And from here the ethical slut has to reassure the jealous person, but without conceding that the jealousy is perfectly justified and that there is nothing wrong with the worldview of the jealous person. You know, you cannot go there, you cannot concede that. And so this leads to question another claim, that is the claim of abundance. So clearly the authors are presenting the abundance argument in favor of their own lifestyle, right? Like since there is an abundance of love and sex, then there is no reason to be jealous, since jealousy stems from a false belief that there isn't enough for everyone. The conclusion that follows is that abundance, the abundance theory, cannot justify jealousy, and it cannot account for it, so jealousy must find its origin elsewhere. And this is where starvation economics comes in. It serves as providing an origins for jealousy. But here's the problem. The abundance theory can serve as justification for jealousy if you see it not just as an emotion or a projection, but a reaction to injustice. In a world of abundance, of love, injustices are still possible, right? We know that conflict is possible unless the authors are going to commit to a worldview in which conflict is also rooted in the belief of starvation economics. So if there's conflict, there also has to be injustice, right? Unless you can give a guarantee that ethical sluts will always resolve conflicts without resulting in an injustice somehow, without doing anything wrong, which I think is a very big claim and very difficult to maintain, you know? So we have to agree that injustices are still possible in this world of abundance. But if jealousy is a reaction to injustice, well, we can agree that, and we agree that there is injustice, so the abundance theory is not going to prevent jealousy. Just reminding people that there is an abundance of love when they are jealous is not going to cut it, because, well, that's not the issue. You know, the simple fact that jealousy exists in a world of abundance doesn't, you know, give any information about how the two are linked, how the abundance theory and jealousy are linked. In other words, can the abundance theory justify jealousy? And the thing is, the answer is yes. You can explain jealousy with the theory of abundance instead of the starvation economics. You know, if we can prove our yes, then it means that it is not only by starvation economics that we can account for jealousy. We can also account for it with the abundance theory of love. You can simply state that someone isn't jealous because they believe in starvation economics, but because by cheating on them, you are preventing them of getting the abundance of love. After all, love isn't just somewhere, like there in a river or in a prairie somewhere, or is growing on trees for you to just take the fruit. Love is not just is not thrown in a lake in which you can bathe whenever you want. It depends on actions. It depends on human actions. I get love from you through your actions, through your words, through your deeds. Some actions allow me access to that love, while others certainly deny it. And so if the action of having another partner means that my access to the abundance is denied, while another person has it, well, it is only logical and natural for me to be jealous, right? In this scenario, my jealousy is not due to my own changing, as the authors say, but it is due to the actions of another person, of my partner's actions. My partner's actions who are that are causing the short change. So in a house of abundance, it is perfectly justified for children to be jealous because if the parents give more to one child, they can be denying access to the abundance for the other. So it is indeed very difficult to justify why is someone receiving more than the other when there is an abundance, right? So even if you have unconditional love, and even if you love your children all the same, that doesn't mean that you won't cause actual injustices or discrimination between them and make some jealous of others. And so in this sense, a theory of abundance doesn't justify polygamy. It can as much justify monogamous, it doesn't only justify polygamy, it can as much justify monogamous lifestyles. In a world of abundance, it is hard to justify why would people have the need for multiple partners. Firstly, because in such a world you are going to work on discipline and you're going to need humility even more than before. We can we can overlook the arrogance or the bad manners of someone who lives in scarcity because he's already getting through enough shit already. But someone who lives in abundance has no excuses for being greedy. If you take too much, you can simply come off as a greedy person, as a glutton who is never satisfied. And so here, having more than one partner can indicate that you are just, ungrateful. That you cannot appreciate the love which is already plenty that your partner is giving you. Why would you need a secondary relationship? Why would why would you talk with someone else? Like, imagine, for example, if you are with your partner, and he, for example, is talking with his ex, you can say, why would she come to you? Maybe your ex is going through some tough time, and you just want to be nice, to her. But then, your girlfriend be like, why is she coming to you? I thought there is plenty of love out there. Can she get it from someone else? Why does she have to come to my man? And so the jealousy and the contempt of your partner can be justified with this theory of abundance. It doesn't really reject it. If there is plenty, why need more? Isn't the plenty that your partner offers you enough? Aren't you the one who is living in false beliefs of scarcity and starvation? And so maybe you should work on that. Maybe you should do some spiritual exercises and control your emotions like your monogamous partner does. Why is it that it is I, the jealous, the jealous person. Why is it I who have to stay and wait for my jealousy to flush out? Why don't you wait until your horniness fades for a moment? Or even better, if jealousy is caused by myself and I can control it, well, why isn't it the same with guilt? Can't the ethical slut control her own guilt? We're not supposed to make them feel wrong or to make them feel guilty. So in that sense, feeling guilty is caused by either the culture or the jealous partner. But when it comes to the jealousy of the partner, then suddenly it's no longer caused by external factors. All of a sudden it arises from within, like guilt. Okay, someone makes you feel guilty, but jealousy, no, that's on you. And so why don't you simply stay still and work on your guilt to make it go away? I mean, guilt when you look at it, isn't such a shattering emotion, right? Surely it is tolerable when you develop the right skills to handle your guilt. And so why isn't it the ethical slut, who, when you get the desire of wanting to be with more than just one partner, why don't you go read the book, or go take a long walk in the woods? I mean, because these are some of the exercises that the authors advocate when you are feeling jealousy. Why is it the jealous person who has to work on those things and not the polygamous partner? Or why shouldn't we schedule a time for the polygamous partner to see a therapist? Not to pathologize, of course. I mean, with everything the book says about jealousy, they never come close to suggest that we pathologize jealousy, so we're not going to pathologize guilt. But I think that all of this talk about you wanting to see other people can be just a front to hide more unresolved issues. We can say that. Like, again, I'm not pathologizing, but isn't there a fear? Isn't there an imagined movie about, how the ideal relationship should be when you are polyamorous? Maybe if you own up to your own emotions and actions, you'll see that you already have everything that you need. Why want more? So take responsibility and accountability, and you'll see all of the love that you can get from just one person. Surely you can, we can even say that surely you can give up on a few desires or kinks, right? Surely you can compromise. And if you think that compromising is such a shattering emotion, we can provide you with the skills to make compromise very tolerable. Look, your partner is doing it already. He is compromising. Maybe you just let your emotions and desires run their course, and you'll see that compromising a little bit of freedom isn't that big of a deal. So we can say this, the theory of abundance can justify this, monogamy. Monogamy as, the right and only way to have loving relationships. So, anyways, we can go along with this, but I think you see the point. Everything that the book says, philosophically speaking, can be twisted easily to justify the opposite position. The philosophical argument of this book to justify polygamy can easily be a tool for justifying the opposite position. And you can maybe perhaps think that the argument provided here can justify the opposite position even more efficiently it can identify, it can justify monogamy more efficiently than polygamy. So that's my problem with this argument. Again, I'm not against polygamy. I am for polygamy. I am also very on board with many of the advices and many of the exercises that they give in this book. I just don't think that we have to hold to a worldview in which jealousy is just out of the door. I think we can have constructive discussions without throwing away jealousy. I think that sometimes jealousy can reveal some things that are true about your relationships, about how people value you, and so I think that the book kind of fails there. It fails to see this flaw. But I don't know what you think. You can of course leave comments to say maybe I overlooked some things, and we will see how my debate with the Black Ponderer will go. Neil, I hope you watched this video and that you enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward